As more and more begin to know, the status quo has got to go. They're bound to say yes to a man named Dr. No, a man who makes the establishment panic. Grassroots are growing way too wild, too organic.
So, President Biden acknowledged on Thursday that his strikes against the Houthis were not working to stop them, but he vowed that they would continue anyway. And the U.S. military bombed Yemen for the fifth time within a week, for the fifth time since last Friday. Listen to this quote from Biden. It's really something. He was asked by a reporter if his airstrikes, missile strikes against the Houthis were working, and he said, quote, "Well, when you say working, are they stopping the Houthis? No. Are they going to continue? Yes," end quote. So just a really amazing quote from President Biden, showing what a mess this whole thing is. And then yet again, more U.S. strikes in Yemen. So U.S. Central Command reported that it launched more strikes claiming to target Houthi anti-ship missiles. CENTCOM said, quote, "As part of ongoing multinational efforts to protect freedom of navigation and prevent attacks on maritime vessels in the Red Sea, on January 18th, U.S. Central Command forces conducted strikes on 2 Houthi anti-ship missiles that were aimed into the southern Red Sea and were prepared to launch," end quote. Later on Thursday, the Houthis said that they targeted another U.S.-owned ship, the Chem Ranger, which is a chemical tanker. The Houthis said that the attack resulted in direct hits, although CENTCOM later put out a press release on it that said the crew observed the missiles impact the water near the ship. So they're saying the missiles didn't hit the ship. The Houthis are saying that they did. Either way, it just goes to show the bombing is not stopping the Houthis. As Biden himself said, their attacks on not just American shipping, but just in general, their attacks in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden have really increased since Biden started bombing Yemen. Just a complete disaster. And the Houthis, officially known as Ansar Allah, have vowed that they will not back down in the face of the U.S. military. Ansar Allah's leader, Abdul Malik al-Houthi, said Thursday that it was a blessing for the Houthis to be in a direct fight with the U.S. He said, quote, "We praise God for this great blessing and great honor for us to be in a direct confrontation with Israel and America," end quote. Does that sound like someone who's going to stop because of these airstrikes and everything? No, it doesn't. And just the region in general, things have escalated dramatically. I mean, again, the whole purpose of this is supposedly to protect shipping in the region when way more shipping companies have suspended Red Sea transits. Insurance companies are turning down American and British and Israeli shipping that's going through this region. The whole thing is just becoming a disaster. And then the point that I always make when we talk about this is just the fact that the U.S. backed a brutal Saudi UAE war against the Houthis from 2015 to 2022 that killed 377,000 people. More than half of those people died of starvation and disease caused by the blockade and bombing campaign. And what happened to the Houthis in that time? They just really became stronger and they got better at fighting and developed missile and drone capabilities. So again, it just goes to show these strikes are not going to stop them, but it's just going to continue to escalate. So Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Thursday that he has told the U.S. there will be no Palestinian state in any post-war scenario and that Israel must control all of the territory from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, which includes the West Bank and Gaza. Netanyahu said at a news conference, quote, "In any future arrangement, Israel needs security control of all territory west of the Jordan. This collides with the idea of sovereignty. What can you do?" End quote. So, it sounds a lot like he's saying from the river to the sea, which many pro-Israel people say that if activists say that it's a call for genocide, but when Netanyahu says it, I'm sure it's fine. So his comments came after Secretary of State Antony Blinken called for the creation of a Palestinian state, and other U.S. officials have floated the idea of linking Israel-Saudi normalization with the creation of a Palestinian state in the future, but Netanyahu has rejected both ideas. He said, quote, "This truth I tell to our American friends, and I put the brakes on the attempt to coerce us to a reality that would endanger the state of Israel," end quote. With everything else going on, you got Iran and Pakistan bombing each other. So Pakistan said Thursday that it carried out airstrikes targeting militants in Iran, which came after an Iranian attack on Pakistani soil. Pakistani officials said the strikes targeted 7 locations used by ethnic Baloch. I believe that's how you say it. That's the ethnic group Baloch or Balak, Baloch. But anyway, these militant groups known as the Balochistan Liberation Army and Balochistan Liberation Front. Pakistani warplanes and drones hit targets about 30 miles inside Iran in the Sistan and Balochistan province. Iran condemned the strikes and said the attack killed 9 foreign nationals, including 3 women, 4 children, and 2 men. The Iranian Foreign Ministry said it condemns the unbalanced and unacceptable action of Pakistan in the drone attack on non-Iranian citizens in a village on the border wall of the 2 countries, end quote. So earlier in the week, Iran launched unprecedented missile strikes in Pakistan against Jaish al-Adl, a Sunni militant group that took credit for a December 15th terrorist attack against a police station in Rask, Iran, which killed 4 people. And Pakistan, which is a nuclear-armed country, strongly condemned the Iranian strikes and said they killed 2 children. Both sides are calling on each other to do more to deal with the militant groups that operate along the Iran-Pakistan border.
Here's Gerald Salenti with today's trends in the news.
Record real estate debt set to come due. Oh, this was in yesterday's Wall Street Journal. Oh, kind of old news. We've been warning about the commercial real estate crisis for how long now? Oh, when they started the COVID war, forced people to close down their businesses and got to work from home. Oh, yeah, it did great damage. Yeah, the office occupancy rate is only about 50%, and office vacancy rate is 20%. So record real estate debt set to come due. Commercial sector expected to reach a peak of $602 billion. Yep. And then the markets. Today, the markets went up. They've been down, up and down. None of this means anything right now. This is Macy's just announced they're going to close, 5 stores, fire about almost 2,500 people. And the Google, one after another, firing. But everything's fine. Everything's okay. Don't worry about it. Things are just going to be okay. The whole game is rigged. The eye-popping interest payments spike on our national debt. Combined net worth of nation's most prominent billionaires would cover a single year's interest. This is from the Daily Wire. You ready? The United States collected $4.4 trillion in federal taxes in fiscal 2023, up year from $4.19 trillion in fiscal 2022. Yet the debt increased by more than $2 trillion. Taxes, stealing our fucking money. Taxes, robbing you fucking blind to give you back shit so the scumbag bureaucrats could have their jobs, and these fucked up pricks, and I can't say the other word, politicians never have a working day in their life. This is an article in the toilet paper record. $6 to get the Sunday Times, by the way. You get nothing from it. Stupid bullshit. Russia sows instability. Davos Forum is cautioned. They go on to say here, they're quoting Zelensky. I don't believe Putin is capable of changing. Only humans can do that. So Putin is not human. Zelensky, who plays the piano with his penis, he's human. And then they came out with a peace formula. They call this a peace formula. How about calling it bullshit? The plan calls for full Russian withdrawal from all Ukrainian territory, including Crimea. Oh, yeah, that's going to happen. Oh, that will happen right away. Peace formula. Who the fuck are you talking to? We're talking to the fucking morons out there that swallow shit. All right, take it easy, Salenti. They say that the war in Ukraine has been a notable but not dominant topic, meaning it's coming to the end. And then they had this Sasha Ustanova, a member of the Ukrainian parliament, who spoke at a bipartisan gathering of American members of Congress on Monday, saying, quote, Ukraine will not make it without the support of the world, and especially the United States. Hey, I'm an American. I don't want my money going over there. And by the way, in your Trends Journal, wrote about the United States overthrow the democratically elected government of Viktor Yanukovych in 2014 in detail, and on and on and on and on, and what caused Russia to invade. Again, totally opposed to the invasion, totally understand why it happened. She goes on to say, you ready for this? This is why this is the toilet paper record. No comments other than what they want to put in there. I just want everyone to be honest with you. I just want to be honest with you, right? Honest with you, then she begins to lie. I think everyone thinks Ukraine is winning. Everyone thinks Ukraine is winning. Who are you talking to? Nobody thinks Ukraine is winning. Hey, your counteroffensive failed. Was one of the covers of your Trends Journal. We said, don't count on the counteroffensive. Said Russia was not going to lose before the war even started. But we all think Russia is losing and Ukraine is winning. Talking about the Davos gang. That President Ursula von der Leyen, or Lion, L-Y, ING, lying. Yeah. Another little warmongering freak. This is the number one threat. The number one threat that Davos states is misinformation. Quote, for the global business community, the global business community? Oh, that's the only people that count. Okay. The top concern for the next 2 years is not climate or conflict. It's disinformation and misinformation. Yep. There you got it. That's it. That's the greatest threat. Quote, for the collaboration between government and corporations in its fight against industrial scale disinformation that imperils establishments' official narratives. So only supposed to believe the authorities. You are only allowed to swallow our shit? You are not allowed to think for yourself? We kill people all over the world in the name of freedom and democracy? Misinformation. Who the fuck you talking to? Oh, we're talking to the gang that runs the world. All we are plantation workers of Slavelandia.
Your daily dose of liberty education starts here. The Tom Woods Show.
With a number that was dug up relatively recently by John Early, who was a former assistant commissioner at the Bureau of Labor Statistics, having to do with welfare dependency. And it appears in this book called The Myth of American Inequality. I wrote John Early to get a complete backup on the number. And it goes this way. Looking at the poorest one-fifth of the population, in 1967, 2/3 of those eligible to have jobs, age eligible basically, had jobs. 2/3. Cut to 2017, where the job market was flourishing, and that had collapsed to 1/3. 1/3 of those eligible to have jobs had jobs. So it went from 2/3 to 1/3. And as Early and his colleagues point out, the only possible explanation is not the job market, because the 2017 job market had an abundance of jobs. It's really that the welfare state expanded fourfold in real terms over this period. That when the government creates a welfare state, it creates a culture of dependency. There's no real stake in giving people the so-called hand and not a handout. And so that's what's happened. These people are trapped in poverty, partly because of the so-called fiscal cliff. And the fiscal cliff being that once you start earning your first dollar after you receive welfare benefits, it costs you almost like more than $1 in benefits. So there's no stake on the part of the government to get people out of poverty. There's, in fact, a stake on the part of bureaucracy to keep people in poverty, keep people on the dole, because that's how they do their business. So again, I start with, in that case, in the most contentious part of making a case to a progressive. How are you going to help the poor? Are there going to be people who have difficulty making it on their own? And the answer is given in part by our colleague Gerard Casey, whom you had on the show. I think I prompted you to have him on from an essay he wrote called "Let the Poor Starve: A Libertarian Approach to Welfare." As he wrote, there was social welfare before the welfare state got into the welfare business. And so my point then is that if indeed there are people who have difficulty making it on their own in a free market, the free market can best handle it. If you give it to government, government will create dependency. If you give it to the free market, then the free market has a much better chance of helping these people in the appropriate way. So that's my main point there, Tom. Any comments, any criticisms?
I also like the point that Johann Norberg makes, where he tells the old joke about how do you get yourself a small fortune? So you start with a large fortune and you whittle it away.
And yes.
And so he says that the analogy with Sweden is that in the 19th and early 20th centuries, it was a much more free market place. So it could build up a lot of wealth that it could then spend on whatever these social welfare programs and stuff. So even in 1950, tax revenues in Sweden were still only around 21% of GDP. So it was over the next few decades that you get to see the much higher taxes coming in. And then, then you do see a little bit of more of a slowdown. But the wealth to do it came about in the first place because they had a market economy that could generate all this. I mean, you couldn't establish a welfare state like that in a poor country that was starting off with nothing. So that's a fact.
Well, that's basically a good point. I would have to add to Johann's point that that as much as you might have a free market in 1950 or 1960, Argentina, for example, and other countries can prove that, and of course Venezuela can prove that it's not that hard for a destructive government to wreck the free market that they inherited. And so there is a certain, that what was it? The mayor was it the president of Denmark or the mayor who protested when Bernie Sanders said they're socialists?
Right.
They do make efforts, and they did reform. They do make efforts to retain their free market. So I would caution and say that just because you have a free market in 1950 doesn't mean you can't get some strongmen dictators and lunatics to destroy it in a matter of 10 or 20 years.
Yeah,
so
no, the point was that as recently as 1950, they were still not, unusually odd in the amount of, the percentage of GDP going to taxes. And then you get all this happening.
Yes. Because I would say that they would have been better off had they just remained free market. Because,
of course.
Again, because they do have a culture. Although, there still are plenty of scandals. I gather what in Sweden in particular, it is possible to continue to go to college on the government's dole, and clearly a lot of people are taking advantage of it. There are a lot of abuses. I guess they have not created a culture of dependency, which is what's happened in this country. And indeed, it is what's happened in those so-called southern countries that also practice the Scandinavian model. And so we're cherry-picking then extremely self-reliant cultures in the case of the Scandinavians and using that as a case study to show that the U.S. should follow their example. And it's bound to be a failure. It already is a failure.
The Peter Schiff Show.
Just found out that a judge, I think this was yesterday, or was it earlier today? I forget. But JetBlue was going to merge with Spirit Airlines. And of course, there's lawsuits from the government because the government is like, no, we can't have this. This is bad for the consumer. Right? This is anti-competitive because two competitors are going to become one. And so therefore, maybe there'll be fewer routes and so prices might be higher. And so they use the antitrust laws to file a lawsuit. And a judge basically agreed with the government and canceled the merger. Now, when the news comes out, immediately, I think after, Spirit Airlines announced that it's filing for bankruptcy because this is why it's merging. It can't survive on its own, and the merger was its only chance, which shows you how ridiculous the government lawsuit is. Because without the merger, the company is going out of business, and in fact, it may even go into liquidation. The ironic result of the government blocking the merger, because they say that it's going to harm competition and cause prices to go up, is that competition will be harmed even more and prices will rise even further by blocking the merger and having the company go out of business. In fact, look at all the other airlines. Their stock prices shot up when the government did that. Why? Because that means, this is good for us. We can charge even higher prices. Again, everything the government does backfires, right? It would be better if the government stayed out of it and let the free market function. Our politicians could learn a lot from Milei, right? Javier Milei, the new president of Argentina, who gave a brilliant speech at Davos. I really wish that we had a president like that here in America, if we even had somebody to vote for, somebody running for president anywhere near the caliber. But he understands this. But here's the biggest irony of it all when it comes to the airlines. The government is upset that this merger may limit competition. And so it wants to stop the private sector from operating more efficiently, which is what the goal was of this merger, was to create economies of scale, to create efficiencies that ultimately would benefit the consumer. Right? The government action is what's harming the consumer. But if the government really cared about the consumer, about people buying airline tickets, what the government could do is remove the legal impediment that it has imposed that prohibits foreign carriers from competing with domestic carriers on U.S. routes. The government, and I've talked about this on the podcast in the past, but not everybody heard that podcast, so I'm not, sometimes I have to go over the same material twice. But a lot of you might not have heard this, and most Americans don't even know this. But it is illegal, based on U.S. government rules. It is illegal for a foreign carrier to sell tickets on a domestic route, even if the plane is flying that route. And if you're not sure what I mean, let's say you got Air New Zealand, for example. Let's say you got an Air New Zealand flight that starts out in New York and then flies to LA right? So people in New York want to go to New Zealand. People in LA want to go to New Zealand, right? So they buy a ticket on this Air New Zealand plane. And so it starts in New York, and then the New Yorkers, they board the plane. Then the plane flies to LA. Now, of course, it's got a lot of empty seats, right? Because it's waiting to pick up the rest of the passengers in LA who also want to go to New Zealand. So it flies from New York to LA and then picks up the rest of the passengers. And then it takes the full plane and flies to Auckland or whatever, right? Well, why can't Air New Zealand sell a ticket from New York to LA, right? Because the plane is like half empty. A lot of people want to go from New York to LA. You got this beautiful airplane, right, that are, a lot nicer than a lot of the domestic airlines, great quality, business class, first class seats, right? They're empty, right? Why can't Air New Zealand sell those tickets? Why can't someone just buy a ticket from New York to Los Angeles on Air New Zealand? Because the government won't let them. The government is prohibiting it by law to limit competition and cause air prices to be higher, right? If all of these planes, all these carriers, Air New Zealand, Qantas, Cathay Pacific, Singapore Airlines, Emirates, if all these airlines that are already flying above the United States and landing at our airports, if the U.S. government simply allowed these planes to sell tickets on their empty seats, it's the same amount of fuel, right? We're wasting all this fuel. People could be sitting in those seats. Why are they not there? Because the U.S. government won't let them there. So think about the hypocrisy of trying to block this merger because, this might result in higher prices. What the government is doing is causing higher prices. And that's the only justification. The only reason they're doing it is to keep prices higher for United Airlines and Delta Airlines and American Airlines, right? They don't want to have to compete with these other airlines. So they got the government to limit their competition, right? So this is what government does. Government pretends it's our friend. We got to protect the consumer. No, it's the government that is harming the consumer. The consumer needs protection from government, not from the free market. See, Milei understands this, but none of our leaders do.
Domestic imperialism. 9 reasons I left progressivism. It reminds me of, I think it was Rothbard, who wrote about how liberals would often say about LBJ, his Great Society was great, but the Vietnam War ruined everything. That was like the two sides of LBJ. And Rothbard goes, no, it's the same thing, man. The exact same government that's going to remake American society at home to be perfect according to the specifications of the technocrats is the exact same ideology behind remaking Vietnam. We'll just do the strategic Hamlet program and whatever else. Implement it away and it'll work, just like everything will work.
Yeah, the domestic population is the group that the government's at war with but has surrendered. That generally is it. Because, if the Vietnamese would have just surrendered, according to Robert Caro, the famous LBJ historian, LBJ wanted a Tennessee Valley Authority throughout Vietnam so they could be a kind, prosperous society and wouldn't, have to be subject to the terrible whim of the Soviets. And while the Soviets are terrible, these bombing campaigns of Operation Rolling Thunder in Vietnam, Operation Barrel Roll, which I believe was in Cambodia and portions of Laos. These mass murder campaigns are just completely unjustified. If they had only surrendered and did what the government told them, then they would have been fine. The point is that what they're objecting to is some people claiming the right to rule over others. That's what really gets to the heart of what it means to be a domestic imperialist.
Yeah. All right. Now, the book title is not 9 Reasons You Shouldn't Be a Progressive. It's 9 Reasons I'm Not One Anymore, basically, right? You say 9 Reasons I left progressivism. So tell us about you and what sort of a progressive were you and what was it that really got through to you?
Well, I was the sort of progressive who saw Barack Obama as the real turning point in America. History of slavery and Jim Crow, the real thing that would
And
turn
how
it
old
around.
were you in 2008?
I must have been 12 years old. I remember because I would go to Sedona every weekend and see my grandparents, and they would talk politics. And I thought, well, it's crystal clear. There's some people who want to give you stuff for free and they want to be nice. And then there's other people who disagree with that. How could you possibly disagree with it? So when I came across people like Ron Paul, this would have been an interview in 2012 that he was giving before a presidential debate. They had asked him a question. Your philosophy is significantly different from the others on the stage. If there's one book you would want people to be introduced to get an idea of where you stand on the issues, what would it be? And he said Frederick Bastiat's The Law. Now, when I started reading Bastiat and The Law, because I was intrigued by someone like Ron Paul, I came across the idea of economic costs that did not relate to money. So obviously you can see that the military isn't free, even when the government pays for it. They allocate money away from the voluntary sector and give it to Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, the soldiers, and the generals, or they print it, and in that case makes all dollars in the economy worth less than they otherwise would be because there's a higher supply of dollars in circulation. However, I did think that somehow you could make healthcare free or education free. I guess I had just never really put one and one together. I ended up coming across a story. This is one of them. I cited on page 27. It's titled Jay Austen's Beautiful, Illegal Tiny House from Reason Magazine. It says, at a cost that ranges from $10,000 to $50,000, tiny homes like the Matchbox could help to ease the shortage of affordable housing in the capital city. This is in Washington, D.C. Heating and cooling costs are negligible. Rainwater catchment systems help to make the home self-sustaining. They're an attractive option to the very sort of residents who the city attracts in abundance. Single, young professionals without a lot of stuff who aren't ready to take on a large mortgage. But tiny homes come with one enormous catch. They're illegal, in violation of several codes in Washington, D.C.'s zoning ordinance. Among the many requirements of the 34 chapters and 600 pages of the code are mandates defining minimum lot size, room size, alley widths, and accessory dwelling units that prevent tiny houses from being anything more than a part-time residence. So this is where the rubber meets the road. You have something that I think is not great. I think you should have a bigger house. I think you should have more opportunities, whatever. You can agree to disagree. The difference is the progressive actually advocates regulations which forcibly stop someone like Jay Austen from making these houses at a price range of $10,000 to $50,000 and giving them to people who currently do not have homes or cannot afford their own home. So that is where I went from, yes, I completely sympathize with the masses. I'm totally against discrimination based off race or gender, but I could still have those things in my philosophy and be a libertarian. What separates the progressive from the libertarian is the progressive doesn't stop at recommending. It doesn't stop at providing potential alternatives. They literally say, we will have the state forcibly confiscate these houses from the people currently in them for their own good. And this was such a stark example. It makes sense. You see people like George Eastman, who, while he didn't invent the camera, he had a number of innovations which made it so you can have a camera that is very small that can fit into your pocket. And that's how he made a lot of money. He made a lot of money by drastically decreasing the price of something as valuable as a camera. We see it in TVs. We see it in computers. We see it whenever there is more competition, whenever there's more voluntarism, when there's much more customer empowerment than if the state is involved. So it was really this moral economic cycle, which I got. And there's not just the economic incentive for producers to produce for the masses in the free market. It's also the only moral system because it actually respects people as ends in and of themselves. So you might say, these houses were too tiny. People should only have big houses. The question is, what are you willing to do? Provide alternatives? Nothing wrong with that. Give them advice on how to get more skills so they can have more income and buy a bigger house? That's also fine. The progressive actually claims to own your body and all potential houses in the area of America and will forcibly stop you from doing something that you think makes your life better off because they know better than you. That's why I joined progressivism. That's an example of why I left.
Welcome to Liberty Lockdown. Please scan your barcode. Your liberty ain't gone, but yeah, it's on hold.
God bless Javier Milei, man. Going into the lion's den and telling them the state is the problem. These people are in fucking Davos every year talking about how the state is the answer to everything. And he walks in there and he says, the state is the problem. Do you know how important this is? Do you know how vitally necessary this is? Just assume for a second that Javier Milei and Vivek Ramaswamy and Donald Trump, everybody's controlled up. Okay. What about the fire that they're igniting with this rhetoric? What about the people that are listening and internalizing this and going and picking up Rothbard or Mises and starting to deep dive these rabbit holes and figuring out that the central bank is actually what's destroying their way of life? How do you put that flame out once it's ignited? It ain't easy. What if you do it on scale? What if you have 1 billion people all over the world that read it, that internalize it, that become as passionate and as psychotically optimistic as I am? How do you stop them then? You don't. You get out of their fucking way. And you hope that they're kind enough to forgive you. This is why I'm pumped. Okay? Maybe Milei fails in Argentina. Maybe Vivek gets no opportunities in the Trump administration. Maybe Vivek is proven to be a fraud ultimately. None of it is actually relevant to what I'm talking about. I'm talking about igniting a flame that cannot be extinguished. That's what they're doing. And they're doing it to the faces of the people that are responsible for the downfall of civilization, as they use flowery rhetoric as they try to explain how they are superior to all of us, how the technocrats ought to have control, how they have a moral clarity as to their own superiority, that they have complete certitude that if given infinite power over every man, woman, and child's life all over the world, that if only that would happen, if only we would stop thinking for ourselves and expecting to be able to do things of our own volition, that then all of our problems would be alleviated. They're wrong. They're evilly wrong. And we have people now that can go into these events and say so with passion, with facts, with statistics, with the history to prove it out. That's fucking incredible. I am so inspired. If you're not, check your pulse. What the fuck? I mean, what the fuck? This is amazing. This is amazing. What an unbelievable time to be alive. We have an anarcho-capitalist that's the president of a goddamn nation with 50 fucking million people in it. What are we talking about? There's no hope? You have no hope. A totally unthinkable thing just happened, and you are hopeless. Well, then give up already. Pack it in. But you know what? For those that haven't given up, stop dragging us down. Allow the people that are passionate to get the fuck after it. If for no other reason than your own potential well-being. You don't know what I might go out and accomplish. You don't know what Vivek might go out and do, or Millet, or even Trump in his second term. Who knows? Maybe the dude has actually learned something. Maybe. I'm not saying it's likely. Odds are probably against it, but maybe. Have a little fucking hope. There's miraculous things happening all around us, from Bitcoin to decentralized communication to encryption to people finally embracing libertarianism and sound money, to people being sick of the endless wars, to people actually realizing that $34 trillion of debt is not sustainable, to actually thinking about these things on a high level, not superficial, to be able to say so with passion and studiousness, to actually understand what the fuck you're talking about. There are more of us right now on Earth than ever. I am not hopeless. I will not give up. Sorry to get so jacked, but I'm fucking serious about this shit. I want a goddamn planet that my fucking kids can be safe in. Do you? Have you given up so much that you have just written off the future of your progeny, that you don't care what happens to them? Because if that's who you are, then you need to look in a fucking mirror. You need to get back in this game. It's not over. We're not even close to the end. Is it dire? Are the odds stacked against it? All of that. Yes. Yes. Is it over? Has the shot clock expired? Is the fourth quarter, are we down by 3 touchdowns with 30 seconds? No, the fuck we're not. No, the fuck we are not. We have time-tested, beautiful ideas to counter these utterly shitty ideas that are being pushed on us by some of the least impressive, most worthless human beings that have ever walked the face of the planet. And you think we can't win in light of that? What the fuck? I'm sorry. No. I'm not going to lose to these people. You're going to lose to these people? Are you fucking kidding me? It's ridiculous. They're not going to fucking win, okay? So just put it in your fucking brain. We're winning today. And the next day, and the next week, and the next month, and the next year, we're going to fucking win over and over and over again. Will we have setbacks? Yes. It's inevitable that we will. But at the end of the day, liberty will win out. The spirit of humanity will not be extinguished as long as people like you and I are breathing. Are you breathing? Yeah, me too. We're breathing. Have some fucking hope.
You're like me, you've probably heard some people say things like, hey, the founders weren't anarchists after all, in various scenarios, and I'll get to that in just a moment, but it's true, they weren't. But I think many of them were actually far more radical than most people today even realize. And before I get into some of the quotes that probably tell that story better than I could, I should point out that one of the big reasons that the Federalists gave for having to have a new constitution, having to have the Philadelphia Convention, having to have a stronger general government, was over fear of the danger of anarchy and no government. I think the best example, we see this all over the place in their writings and in their speeches, but one of the best examples comes from a letter from Henry Knox to John Sullivan right at the beginning of the Philadelphia Convention, or just before it. He said, impressed most fully with the belief that we are verging fast to anarchy, and that the present convention is the only means to avoid the most flagitious evils that ever afflicted 3 millions of freemen. So in other words, the danger was they were going to end up with no government. It was going to be absolute chaos, destruction, blood in the streets. The worst evil known to man, in essence, would be that. And this kind of thing was really hammered home in the Federalist Papers, Madison and Hamilton. You see this over and over. And in the Virginia and New York and other ratification debates, you see Federalists pointing to the chaos that was going to ensue if they didn't ratify. And Patrick Henry said, look, this is even though Patrick Henry was not an anarchist, I've got a great quote from him later on in the episode as well, but even though he was not one, he certainly was saying, look, you are fear-mongering and trying to rush us into approving a consolidated system over this type of a fear. Imaginary dangers is what he said. But here's Richard Henry Lee with a similar take. This is a letter to Edmund Randolph in October of 1787. He said, to say that a bad government must be established for fear of anarchy is really saying that we should kill ourselves for fear of dying. That's a great one. I've also seen that same quote put out there by John Williams in the New York ratification debates. I'm pretty confident John Williams was the anti-federalist writer Brutus. So this is a kind of a view like, look, okay, we agree with you that anarchy is going to be bad, but it's not the worst thing that we could face. Used in various scenarios. You generally, when conservatives do that, they're basically saying, what, you want to get rid of this federal agency or this federal program, this particular one I like. So what, you think the founders were anarchists? That's crazy, man. But then on the other side, from anarchists themselves, we also hear people say this, basically that the founders were absolutely clueless about the danger of government. And I think both ends of this conversation actually miss much of the radicalism of the founders. On the conservative side, they're being far less radical than the people that they revere. And on the anarchist side, they're oftentimes dismissing people who are actually far more radical than, well, most people alive today. So I've got a few quotes that I think can really hammer this home. So here's Thomas Jefferson says, rightful liberty is unobstructed action according to our will, within the limits drawn around us by the equal rights of others. So that's rightful liberty to Thomas Jefferson. But he went a little further. I do not add within the limits of the law, because law is often but the tyrant's will, and always so when it violates the rights of an individual. Now, this is sounds like a precursor to something that Josiah Warren, anarchist of the 19th century, wrote in his 1848 Equitable Commerce. He said, liberty, then, is the sovereignty of the individual. So sovereignty meaning final authority. So Warren, I've seen people make the claim that he was a descendant of the great patriot Dr. Joseph Warren, the great Revolutionary War hero. I don't know if that's actually been confirmed or not, but you can see how this lineage kind of connects, especially with Jefferson's view about how law is often but the tyrant's will, talking about every time that law violates the rights or the authority, the sovereignty, I guess, of the individual. Liberty, then, maybe I'm taking a little too far on Jefferson's take, but I think there's a connection here. Liberty, then, is the sovereignty of the individual, and never shall man know liberty until each and every individual is acknowledged to be the only legitimate sovereign of his or her person, time, and property, each living and acting at his own cost. And Jefferson has another take here that I thought was interesting from his first inaugural address. This is March 4th, 1801. Can you imagine a president coming into office and saying, hey, this is what we need to do with our administration? Check it out. A wise and frugal government, which shall restrain men from injuring one another, shall leave them otherwise free to regulate their own pursuits of industry and improvement, and shall not take from the mouth of labor the bread it has earned. And here's James Otis Jr. In 1763, the rights of the British colonies asserted and proved. All the way back to 1763. No man can take my property from me without my consent. If he does, he deprives me of my liberty and makes me a slave. This is a precursor to a taxation as theft, something that's very popular amongst anarchists and libertarians in modern times. Now, Otis was specifically referencing this in relationship to being in a state of nature, but he saw representation, at least being a part of what constitutes consent. And now Lysander Spooner, in his No Treason number 6 in 1870, he took the same position that taking stuff from people without their consent constituted a robbery, an armed robbery. But what he actually viewed as being consent was far more limited than what someone like James Otis Jr. or many of the founders and old revolutionaries. He rejected the notion that representation was the same as consent. But anyways, here's Spooner's take. The fact is that the government, like a highwayman, says to a man, your money or your life. And many, if not most, taxes are paid under the compulsion of that threat. And then he goes on to explain that the government is actually worse than the highway robber, because the robber just steals from you and then heads off and robs somebody else. But government keeps coming back for more. He says, furthermore, having taken your money, he leaves you as you wish him to do. He does not persist in following you on the road against your will, assuming to be your rightful sovereign on account of the protection he affords you. He puts protection and sovereign in scare quotes, which is awesome. He does not keep protecting you by commanding you to bow down and serve him, by requiring you to do this and forbidding you to do that, by robbing you of more money as often as he finds it for his interest or pleasure to do so, and by branding you as a rebel, a traitor, and an enemy to your country, and shooting you down without mercy if you dispute his authority or resist his demands.
guess we'll start with the term Bidenomics, which should make everyone cringe when they hear it. And not just this isn't a partisan thing. Reaganomics, the whole thing, Great Society, New Deal, fair deal, square deal, it goes all the way back. It's government intervention. And the truth is there are economic laws, period, and they can't be broken. And all these nomics, Bidenomics, Reaganomics, assumes the government is outside of this. They are outside and above these economic laws, and they come up with these special formulas to make the economy great. They have charts and graphs and experts that are all over the media explaining why this government intervention is so good. You know, they think it's like a machine, the economy. They turn a few screws here and flip a few switches there, and presto. And wouldn't you know that things have never been better? Bidenomics, it's never been better, you know? So, I mean, it's all comical once you see what's going on. And in truth, you don't need the government to explain or the media to explain to you your economic situation. You have your own bills, you have your own expenses, your own income. That's all you really need. You have your own eyes and ears. You can see what's going on. But they're there to basically tell you that all your senses are wrong. You know, if there's a problem, it's you. It's not them, because everything they're doing is great. And, you know, we're a long way from this, but, you know, how the government should deal with the economy is to stay out of it. That's the only thing that they should do. Do not interfere. If people use force, if they use fraud, then the government steps in and you punish those people. But that is not going to happen. And not only do politicians not want that, but the people don't want that too. The people want the government to interfere. So that's what they're going to do. And that keeps us in business, because we can come on Fridays and explain why all their interferences are only going to make things worse and not do what they claim. But that's really, you know, the only solution to all these Bidenomics is to just get government out of the economy.
That sounds like a good idea. You know, what happens so often is that there'll be a report and they say, well, things are okay, but they're not doing super, and we're going to have so many new jobs. And then all of a sudden the report comes out and it was a lot more, 50% more, or double. All of a sudden, wow. So when the first report comes out, they're prepared for a really bad thing. And then the next thing is, it was super good. And then about a week or two or a month later, then they have revisions. And this is not because they make mistakes. Their whole system is a big mistake. But they don't make mistakes on these statistics. It's all planned to get people off balance and try to handle the markets, because not everybody hears about the revisions, but eventually the markets are very powerful and will tell you if the economy is getting weaker. Right now, they have these statistics to show that things are going pretty well. The employment rate is up high, but what Peter has done, and he points out that there's a lot of jobs, that a lot of people getting second and third jobs, and they add those in, and they replace full-time jobs. Then all of a sudden, well, people don't want to have a second and third job just to survive and be counted in a positive way, and the full-time jobs are disappearing, and this is all part of the system of governments basically being dependent on lying and fibbing and regulating, you know, all these events. But I think what Peter does, he points out very clearly that you should be careful with these statistics.
With Peter Schiff and the jobs report, you know, whenever you hear jobs report, that's also a central planning, you know, gimmick. It assumes that government is the source of jobs in the economy. They are not, at least not productive jobs. They can make you, you know, dig a ditch and fill it in, but they can't be productive because they don't operate on profit and loss. They don't operate with people voluntarily giving them money. They take the money from everybody, and that's a big difference. You know, when they talk about rescue, those who watch the financial news, oh, they're going to pivot, they're going to lower interest rates again, start printing money again. What that means is they want to keep an artificial high from wearing off. They don't want the bad investments to be liquidated. They want to just paper it over with more money. But as we see, papering over with more money is driving up prices. So that's why the Fed is now caught, because if they want to keep this artificial high going, there's going to be inflation on the other side of it. You know, and I always use this example. You know, imagine you're at a bar and you're drinking at an artificial high, and one of your friends, he's starting to have his hangover, and you're like, quick, get him more drinks. The hangover is starting. Well, that's not rescuing your friend. That's putting him on a bad path, because if you keep pumping him full of drinks, he could die with alcohol poisoning. And, you know, you're not going to keep an artificial situation perpetual. And that's what they try to do with the economy by printing money. You know, ultimately, the hangover is going to hit. And since it's been so long since we've had a hangover and they've distorted things so much, it's going to be bad. And it's too late. There's nothing we can do about it now other than dealing with it rationally when it happens.
The only thing I can see that's going to help is an entire change in an attitude about the role of government. Government can't be involved in the details of all education throughout the states. They can't be in charge of the medical system. We can't be in charge of our empire around the world. We can't allow the medical industry to be controlled by the pharmaceutical industries. We can't let the military-industrial complex run the show, and we're on a collision course. It's, cutting back is not very popular. Well, when the market cuts it back and you lose purchasing power, you lose your job, you can blame somebody else. But if Congress comes along and says, well, we cave in, and the Democrats say, oh, yeah, those Republicans, those few Republicans who have argued, they're right, we have to cut, we have to bring our troops home, we're changing our foreign policy. Tell you what, it wouldn't be easy. But the argument to answer that, if you did the right thing, yes, it would cause some problems. But compared to the problems that we're going to have if we don't straighten out this mess and change our attitude about perpetually expanding the size and scope of government and giving up on the initiative to understand why the government's purpose should be to protect liberty and understand liberty, instead of running the biggest fiat monetary system in the history of mankind, maybe it should be in charge of teaching people what sound money is all about, and reference maybe even the founders who had some strong ideas about money. And I'm also convinced that if people understand what's coming, and they will tolerate more on what has to be done. But if they are fibbed to, like statistics and all this, and why we have to be in the Middle East, and you're still in Iraq, and still in Syria, all this stuff, if they don't hear the truth, all that's going to be is more distortion. But if they hear the truth, they might be able to accept the ideas of, tighten our belts. That's what you have to do if somebody is very sick and needs a serious operation. They know they have to go through something, and it could be painful. You have to have this operation. The society is a little bit more difficult, and the people don't want pain and suffering. They want a free lunch, and that will have to change. And you say, well, why do it if it's going to cause some problems and the people are going to be upset? Because what is coming would be a lot worse. Freedom is an answer to a lot of our problems. People have to be convinced that the founders were on the correct path, that having a constitutional republic is far superior than having what we have today. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.